making the point of saying that yes, and maybe he doesn't say this as clearly as others have, but he addressed it in his speech, saying yes, there can be protests, but there can't be riots, and we need our police. So I think that that's what they're doing. But you're also right, though. It is a problem because it is happening while he is president.
Sam, there seemed to be a genuine concerted attempt to win black votes during this convention. Do you think black votes are really in play?
I think, I think that we're going to see an uptick in black women, which is not a good sign for the president. I think black women have shown throughout his 4 years in office that if they come out and vote, it's very hard for the president overall. With that said, I think the president can get an uptick in black men and also mothers, perhaps. Mothers worried about safety, about crime, about drugs. So we'll see. They have invested in it. They're certainly not going to hit the number that they thought they were. I think the president thought he could get as much as a quarter. That's not happening. But they could get in the high teens or the low teens. If they get something like that, remember, that's the amount. They're taking that away from Joe Biden. But there's another problem, though, too. And the problem is for Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden, like Hillary Clinton, is making the same mistake. What's the mistake? They're trying to fight the last war. The same way these African-American voters came out in record numbers and voted for Barack Obama, they will never come out and vote like that again. The same way another Republican candidate will never get white rural voters the way Donald Trump does. So we're going to have to see what happens. And that's where it goes to turnout and it goes to voting.
Sam, Ivanka Trump, right at the end there, was the first speaker to make a serious attempt to humanise Donald Trump in this entire convention. No personal anecdotes. It was all about what he's done and what he might do in the future, or Joe Biden. The entire Democrat convention was about Joe Biden's character. Do you think it was a mistake to not make a more concerted effort to make Donald Trump more likeable, given how important likeability often is in elections?
You know, when I worked for the president, I'll tell you a very quick story. I came in with him about somebody who's a very smart guy who wrote an article. And the guy said, the president had met him. We had arranged meetings for the president early in the years when I was working for him, those 4 years in the run-up. And he said, if you saw the Donald Trump I knew, you would see a different Donald Trump than the Donald Trump that he shows himself in the public. And I showed this to him, and he said, yeah, but I don't want to do that. I don't want people to see that. So he has a way that he wants to look. And it goes to, when you look at his presidential picture compared to past presidents, he likes to look Churchillian, he'll say. So I'm not surprised. He wants to be a president who runs on leadership and strength and show that his kindness through his policies. It's not going to change, and he'll do that. He'll also have Melania try to humanize him as well, the first lady. But I don't think likability is going to help Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's numbers right now are falling, fave, unfave. So we're gonna have to see. The Biden campaign, I want to be very clear about this. They're banking on two things: COVID and hating Donald Trump. Now, the numbers look like that can work, but prevent defense has never worked this far out, this long for a presidential election.
Sam, I wonder, based on your years of working in close proximity to President Trump, when you see him requiring support coming down the stairs in the White House today, when you see him slurring his words, misspeaking a number of times through the speech, if Joe Biden had done any of that last week, we know what the demented Joe Biden stuff would be going on the internet at the moment. As candidly as you feel you can be, is Donald Trump diminished now in his mid-70s compared to what you knew, say, a decade ago?
Not really. I spoke with him a couple months ago for a long time. I saw him a month earlier than that. He seemed the same. Here's the bottom line. Look at Donald Trump and look at Joe Biden. Who looks healthier? And I don't think anybody can fairly say that Joe Biden looks healthier than Donald Trump. I mean, Joe Biden looks like a walking geriatric. And that's another issue going into this election, because Kamala Harris is from California. California is a very radical leftist state. That debate against Vice President Pence is going to be extremely important as well. And she's a quarter of a heartbeat from the presidency. So I understand people want to say, well, look at Trump. But if you're comparing it to Joe Biden, the bar is very, very low.
It's always great to talk to you. Sam Nunberg, thank you.
Thank you. I always love being on your show.
Well, time now for a check of the polls this week. And Joe Biden's lead in the Real Clear Politics national average has dipped by half a point to just over 7% this week. But a footnote on that, of the 4 national polls released this week that cover last week's Democratic convention and into this week's Republican convention, Biden was leading by 8 points in the Change Research poll, by 9 points in both the Harris X and YouGov polls. It's the Rasmussen poll, which has Biden leading by just 1 point, that brings that overall average down. Now, over at 538.com, where they weigh their poll averages based on the particular pollster's historical accuracy, Joe Biden is actually leading by almost 8.5 points. They only give Rasmussen a C+ for basically overestimating Republican support by around 1.5 points on average. What we can, though, say is that there has been no clear convention bounce this week for Joe Biden. We'll see next week, of course, if President Trump has reached beyond his base at all either to get any sort of a boost. Another interesting indicator, perhaps, TV ratings. The first 3 nights of the Republican convention this week drew an average audience of 16.5 million viewers across network and cable TV. That is down 23% on 2016. Last week, the Democrat convention attracted an average of 19.5 million viewers per night, so 3 million more Democrats watching the DNC, although that average also takes in Biden's big night on Thursday night, which has probably inflated those. Those numbers have dipped slightly since 2016 as well, down 21%. And of course, that could be down to a lower level of enthusiasm this year, but it could also be down to changes in technology and viewing habits. A lot of people watching this streaming online. We will have a definitive comparison when all of Trump's numbers come through. But now, Chaz, to the events in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a city of around 100,000 people. It's south of Milwaukee, just about halfway down to Chicago. On Sunday of this week, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was shot 7 times in the back by police. And like a number of recent police-involved incidents, it was all caught on video. Now, Jacob Blake is in hospital. Reportedly, he's handcuffed to his hospital bed. Despite being paralysed, he may never walk again if he survives this. He had been pulled over after an apparent domestic incident. His former partner had reported that he was in her house without her permission. He had their children with him. A knife was later found in Blake's car. There is a dispute over whether he was holding the knife at any point. Just having a knife in your car is not illegal in Wisconsin.
Yes, and some have noted that there was an outstanding warrant issued for Blake for criminal trespass, 3rd-degree sexual assault and disorderly conduct with domestic violence as a modifier, and so that would add an element to the police encounter. Maybe so, but that does not explain exactly why the actual shooting occurred. When it did, there are many questions to be answered about that yet. But regardless, we then saw some of the now familiar fires and looting and bickering over its coverage. Conservatives had some fun with this chyron from CNN. Fiery but mostly peaceful protests, he says, in front of a fire escape. But Jacob Blake's mum cut through it all with this plea here.
Please don't burn up property and cause havoc and tear your own homes down in my son's name. You shouldn't do it. People shouldn't do it anyway. But to use my child or any other mother or father's child, our tragedy, to react in that manner is just not acceptable. And it's not helping Jacob. It's not helping Jacob or any other of the men or women who has suffered in these areas.
But then things got worse. People started putting calls like this out, asking people to take up arms and defend our city. One of the people who responded to those kinds of calls was 17-year-old Cole Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse is a big Trump fan. He's been in the front row of a Trump rally. His social media has lots of Blue Lives Matter support. But so far, there's been no sign of white supremacy or extremism. In fact, he told reporters what he was doing there only hours before the shooting.
People are getting injured, and our job is to protect this business, and part of my job is to also help people. If there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I need to protect myself, obviously. But I also have my med kit.
Unfortunately, whether you have good or bad intentions, if you lack training, the results can be the same. Enter this guy in the red shirt, who definitely was not a fan of the vigilantes.
Shoot me! Shoot me! Bust on me! For real!
Later in the night, that guy in the red shirt appeared to chase Rittenhouse across a car park, and you can see for yourself what happened then.
Oh, he got a gun, baby. Oh, they shoot him. Oh, he shot him.
The guy in the red shirt was shot in the head and died soon after. Will that be seen as self-defense? I don't know. Either way, Rittenhouse ran off for whatever reason and was soon being chased by other protesters, and then he tripped over and this happened. One more person shot dead, another shot in the arm. Once again, maybe it's self-defense, maybe it's not. Tucker Carlson seems to have made up his mind. Who's at fault here, though?
We do know why it all happened, though. Kenosha has devolved into anarchy because the authorities in charge of the city abandoned it. People in charge, from the governor of Wisconsin on down, refused to enforce the law. They stood back and they watched Kenosha burn. So are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated to murder? How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
Now, that is not true. There were 250 National Guardsmen out that night, so were the police. In fact, the police appeared to have earlier thrown the future shooter and his pals bottles of water and told them how much they appreciated them.
Need water? Seriously. Guys to our right, you need water. We need water. We'll throw you one. Thank you. All right, come on, guys, let's get out of here. We appreciate you guys, we really do.
An interesting approach to vigilantes there, but my biggest concern was acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf, who basically agreed with Carlson. Individuals have a right to protect themselves and their businesses and what they've worked for all their life to build. Fault lies with the local leaders and those local law enforcement of not doing their job. Now, John, it's one thing for a rabble-rouser like Carlson to say that. People obviously have the right to protect their property, but the Homeland Security Secretary essentially giving the green light to vigilantes directly after two people were shot dead, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and Tucker Carlson isn't just another shock jock. He is a nightly presence on Fox News with a hotline to President Donald Trump, arguably at least as influential with the president as Sean Hannity. So his take on this is also empowering President Trump to think in these terms. That a child has a weapon in a protest is, I mean, it is just a tragic situation. Ridiculous that American law actually encourages a child with a gun to be getting themselves involved and then being fed all of this rubbish about how they should be defending their streets and their cities and everything else. He is, to an extent, a victim. He is a stupid kid who's now going to pay a very high price. We don't know how radicalised he has become, whether we should actually be seeing him more like a school shooter, another deranged young man with a gun fetish, just looking for a reason to shoot perceived enemies. So we'll see how this plays out, but it's a terribly unfortunate situation. But we can't allow the president and his supporters to distance themselves from this entirely. Not only was he a Trump supporter, presumably he was watching the Republican convention on night 2 when they had elevated the McCloskeys heroes for waving their guns at Black Lives Matter protesters in their house in a gated community in St. Louis, Missouri. They have sown the seeds. This is the whirlwind they're reaping. I just hope it ends with this. My fear is, as far as President Trump's re-election is concerned, the only way to stop people talking about his terrible handling of the coronavirus is to think that the streets are on fire. Yeah. And now we're seeing it.
Yeah, look, I have to agree with you about the mindset of the McCloskeys being involved here, even if, I don't know if he himself was into the McCloskeys, but when you look at the interviews that Rittenhouse conducted on the night, and there were quite a few, and you look at some of the things that he's put